Welcome to Caregiver Chats. Today, I'm talking about working while caregiving, so stay tuned and we'll get into it. Hi, Dr. Lakelyn here. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. I'm so glad you're taking the time to listen. Be sure to subscribe to Caregiver Chats on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. I also love your questions. You can email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. Today, we're diving into the important topic of working while caregiving. Did you know that about 2/3 of those caring for an aging parent are also working? Many of these individuals feel the impact of caregiving on their careers. In fact, a recent study by AARP and S&P Global revealed that 67% of caregivers struggle to balance their jobs with their caregiving responsibilities. This often means adjusting work schedules, maybe going from full-time to part-time, or taking multiple days off each month, and sometimes even passing up promotions. I could go on as to how this impacts caregivers' employment. It can also be challenging to open up to employers about caregiving responsibilities, and this leaves many feeling unsupported and misunderstood. To explore this topic, I'm thrilled to welcome Liz O'Donnell to the podcast. Liz is the founder of Working Daughters, a supportive community for women navigating the dual responsibilities of elder care and career. She's also the author of an award-winning book called Working Daughter, A Guide to Caring for Your Aging Parents While Earning a Living. Liz brings incredible expertise and insights to this conversation, and I'm so excited to chat with her more today. Welcome, Liz. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It's so good to reconnect. You and I had the chance to talk about working while caregiving several years ago, and I love following the work of your organization, Working Daughter. And I know it was really born out of your personal caregiving journey. So can you share more about that with us and how Working Daughter came to be?
Of course. Yeah. And I think it's quite typical in this space, right? That people go through something and then feel like they have to solve it. That was certainly the case for me. I was working, full-time working mother. I was the breadwinner in our family. My husband was a stay-at-home dad. I thought life couldn't be any busier than it was as a working mother when both of my parents, who were in their 80s at the time, got sick and were in fact both diagnosed with terminal illnesses on the exact same day. Wow. And so I found myself completely overwhelmed, unprepared, and also feeling completely alone. I didn't know other people were going through this. This was almost 10 years, about 10 years ago, and people weren't talking about caregiving like they are now. So I was sitting in my cube at work, surrounded by people much younger than me, and they were wondering why I was leaving work all the time, taking personal calls all the time. And well, as you know, there's so many challenging aspects of caregiving. Trying to stay employed was one of the hardest things.
Wow. And to have both of your parents needing help and support at the same time. I mean, it's hard enough with just one parent, but to have both and the pressures of work and home life, I can only imagine just how daunting. And so wonderful that you've created Working Daughters to bring together people who are in similar situations so they don't feel as alone and isolated. And I think that that's a really beautiful part about the community that you've created.
Thank you. And, I'm a writer, so immediately my mind went to, oh, this is a story. And I knew that maybe I could help people through writing my story. But I find, when I go out and speak, when I talk to people in the Working Daughter community, caring for two parents isn't uncommon at all. And in fact, I met two people last week. I was speaking to financial planners, and two of the people in the audience were caring for 6 people because they had in-laws and step-parents. So more and more people are taking on care for more and more people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of statistics around that. The caregiving pool within a family unit is shrinking because families are having less children or there's more aging adults within families. And so I think we'll see more and more of people caring for multiple aging loved ones at once. And so, gosh, that is probably a topic for another podcast. Today we're talking mainly about, balancing your career while caregiving. And earlier in my introduction, I mentioned a few of the challenges that working caregivers face, but I really love to kind of dive more into these challenges and hear from you. What are some of the caregivers that you support? What are they facing in terms of the challenges that relates to working while caregiving?
Yeah, I'd say the two big ones are cost, which isn't necessarily associated with being a working caregiver, although it speaks to why it's so important that we keep caregivers in the workforce, right? The cost of caregiving. And, we both know the statistics or the data points, right? That the average family caregiver spends about $7,200 a year out of pocket, on costs. We know the story of AARP's own family caregiving expert who filed bankruptcy because her credit card debt, just exploded on her because she was traveling back and forth to care for her father. So that's why it's so important that we keep caregivers in the workforce. And so many caregivers leave the workforce because it's just too daunting to try to show up for work. So cost is a huge one, but time is another one. I did some math, which is always scary, but I looked at the American Time Use Survey, which is something that the U.S. Census Bureau puts out quarterly, and they break down how much time on average people spend on all kinds of tasks, and they break it down by all different demographics. So I looked at the average family caregiver, who's a woman in her late 40s, early 50s, who is in the sandwich, has a child under the age of 18 and an adult over the age of 65 that she cares for, and she works outside the home. And I added up everything she does in a day, and they look at everything from showering and dressing to preparing, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, to commuting to work, caring for their children, their parents. And it added up to 25.5 hours a day.
Wow.
So right there, you see the impossibility. Right, of working while caregiving.
Yeah. Gosh, if only we had more hours in the day. I think every caregiver would love that. But gosh, that is overwhelming and that is daunting. And I think those two things, while we kind of bucket them as two challenges, really there are challenges within each of those challenges too. Exactly. And balancing the time management of it all can be really stressful. And that's why you see those individuals maybe cutting back at work to part-time or quitting their jobs altogether. And I think what's really interesting from an employer perspective is we're starting to see organizations wake up to the fact that their workforce is caring for aging loved ones. And so we're starting to see a few more resources and supports, but it can be probably hard and intimidating to talk to your employer about your caregiving role. I think we're so used to talking about being parents, maternity leave, paternity leave. That's something that we kind of normally talk about. But Liz, why do you think it's harder to talk about the care of our aging parents and that caregiving role?
I think we've made so much progress in supporting working parents in recent years. I mean, there's still more to do, don't get me wrong, especially talking to a new parent. But so it's become more normalized. I mean, even when I had my kids, I was still in an era where women just didn't talk about their kids at work because, I was in the management team, and I was the only woman. I didn't want the guys to think I was distracted. I didn't bring in pictures of my kids. I mean, I look back and that's only, a few decades ago. And I think, how ridiculous. That's just not the case now. But with elder care, we don't have these same sort of, norms in the workplace. You don't hang a picture of your dad with dementia in your cube, nobody sees it. Two, it's a topic that just as a society, we're not comfortable talking about, aging, dying, disease. We're just not comfortable discussing those things. They're personal, they're intimate. And the workplace just isn't talking about them. And because you can't see them, it creates this, this just feeling of I have to sort of, soldier on alone. Working Daughter does a survey. We've done it for 2 years now of our members, and we ask them what they need at work and what they get at work. And flexibility is always the number one thing. Both years it comes up like, way at the top. It is the theme of both of our surveys. But the second strongest theme this year that kind of broke my heart was stigma. So many of the working daughters who took the survey said they don't want to be that employee, the one who has issues, the one who's signaled out, who can't handle things. And that's just devastating.
That is.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, that breaks my heart on a lot of levels as well. I mean, I think that the role of a caregiver, while challenging, it is rewarding and honorable in many ways. And so to feel that stigma attached to it, I hope that we can continue to work on changing that, because, the role of a caregiver is important, and it's going to impact all of our lives. And I think too, perhaps maybe at some of the more senior management levels, those individuals are starting to be impacted by caregiving. And so they're starting to wake up to the realities of it. And then hopefully will start to support their employees that are also going through it. I think sometimes it takes that manager or senior leader being personally impacted by it to then maybe find more resources and supports for their team and their staff.
Absolutely. So I speak to a lot of employee resource groups. A lot of them bring me in to talk about caregiving and, how they can prepare and sort of navigate through their caregiving years. And which is wonderful that companies are, bringing me in, having these conversations. That's great. And the ones where I hear from people, afterwards, and they keep the line of communication open, are the ones where they bring in an executive sponsor, and he or she, and in a few instances it's been a he, share their caregiving stories, and they're just as wild as mine.
Wow.
I get used to now when I speak, I see tears in the audience all the time, because my story, I've told my story so many times that, it's become just part of my life. But I know it can be very moving for people, because it was a lot to lose, both of my parents in such a short period of time. But these executive sponsors come in and they tell their stories, and I'm the one with tears in my eyes, because what they have gone through and what they have navigated in their careers that they haven't talked about until this point. And so then they're up there on the stage with me and they're sharing their stories, and the employees realize, like, I'm in a safe space. The guy in the corner office or the woman in the corner office gets this. And I can now, we can start to make some positive changes in the company. That's where it's really, really powerful.
Wow, that is powerful. And story sharing. I find I also sometimes will go and speak to companies, and then the people that are attending that session start to realize, oh, my colleagues are also going through something like this. And sometimes I get them sharing stories, and they talk about the challenges that they're facing. And it does kind of form that informal support group, or that employee resource group, which can be really helpful. And then they can start to lean on one another. And so I think that it's great to see organizations starting to incorporate some of this in their employee resources and whatnot. And I'd be curious from your perspective, Liz, if a working caregiver is in an organization that maybe doesn't have more of those kind of formalized resources on family caregiving, what are some ways that they can maybe approach their employer, or what kind of suggestions would you have for them? Because I know while offices are starting to do this, it's probably not the norm quite yet.
Yeah. I tell caregivers to look at what opportunities are available to other groups of employees in the workplace, and then see, how you can adapt that for yourself. So what is a company doing for working parents? And is that something that you can then, address? Like, oh, we also have this segment of people, who are caring for adults, and can we look at some of the same types of programs for them? Or start informal groups. Go to HR and say, we want to start, an employee resource group or a support group, and, make sure that HR is on board, and, not worry that you're going to get together and you're going to come with a list of demands. But like we want to, there's a real benefit to supporting caregivers in the workforce. So, framing these in the, around the fact that this is going to make us more productive. This is going to allow us to be at work more, to be more present when we're at work. The loyalty piece, that's another thing that came out of the study, is that caregivers when they feel supported in their workplace, they are so loyal to their employer. So go to HR with those benefits and start with an informal support group. I think, storytelling, like you said, is one way we can start to reduce the stigma because, what I'm worried about and going through, oh, you're going through that too? Oh, and you're going through that too? Oh, okay, this is normal. This is okay.
Yeah. And I think too, when they do have, a caregiving emergency, and they do have to take off or, leave a meeting or a project unfinished to go care for their loved one, then those others that kind of now know that they're in a caregiving role can really step up and help support and help fill in the gaps. And I think that kind of creating that supportive work community can also be really helpful.
It can, and just practically, and that's something I always counsel people too, is make it easy for your employees or your coworkers to back you up. Copy people on emails to your clients. Don't be a lone wolf. Adopt a heavy CC culture. Save your documents to the drives. Whether it's the server or the Google Drive, not your hard drive. Communicate with people, try to keep a running list, almost think about as if you're going out on maternity or paternity leave. As the date got closer for me, I always kept a running list of like, here's where things stand, here are the contacts, here are the key deadlines. When you're in that elder care role, you never know when you might get called out. So, it's a really important time to keep your house in order, if you will, at work, so that you're making it easy for your coworkers to have your back.
Yeah, I really like those tips. Yeah, I like those tips. And sometimes it's a little bit more work to stay up with those lists and keep them current. But I think that it also provides so much peace of mind when you do have to step away. So I think those are fantastic tips. And I think last time we chatted, Liz, you also provided tips about looking into the EAP programs and benefits that employers offer their employees. I think sometimes we hear about them, this time of year, beginning of the year, it's open enrollment. Here are all the benefits. But I think then as we go throughout the year, we forget about those benefits. And so what kinds of benefits have you seen beneficial for caregivers? Maybe some that aren't caregiver specific, and then maybe some that are specific to caregivers.
Yeah. So Working Daughter also for the past 3 years, I think, has published a best places to work for working daughters list. And so we ask companies, to submit so we can highlight exactly, what companies are doing in support of caregivers, because there is progress. And so there's some really interesting stuff that I see coming off of that list. I see companies offering subsidies for retrofitting homes. More and more people, as you know, want to age in place, but aging in place requires a big lift from the family caregiver and, making sure that the home is safe and that it's adaptable. So I've seen some big companies offering, somebody comes in and looks at your parents' home and says, oh, we need to install grab bars here. We need a ramp there. Or, even simple things like I remember my mom had a bad fall because due to osteoporosis, she was shrinking. And so, the dishes that were on the second shelf at some point became too high for her to reach, and she got up on her tippy toes and fell. So people coming in, assessing your parents' home, I thought that was really interesting and not one that you hear a lot about. Of course, backup elder care, you're seeing, more and more partnerships with like Bright Horizons and other providers for backup elder care, which is fantastic because, quality, affordable care is what helps you get to the office or not get to the office. What else am I seeing? Companies providing 24/7 counseling via chat. So when you wake up at 3:00 in the morning and your mind is racing, you can log right on through your HR benefit and chat with somebody who understands caregiving, who can support you and, your mental wellness and well-being. You can even sit there next to your spouse in bed and chat away and not even have to get up. And because it's all text-based, you're not going to wake anyone else up in the house. So there's a lot of good stuff happening out there, just slowly. It's just slow.
Yeah. Well, I think that those are encouraging things to hear, employers starting to offer those benefits. But I would think too, most employers have mental health services. And so even those that maybe aren't caregiver specific that offer counseling or coaching could also be very helpful for caregivers as well.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I do remember we spoke about that. Yeah. And it's a great time to go back and look at your benefit program. Look at the, your healthcare insurance provider. Oftentimes they have benefits baked in. I know I just recently was looking at my insurance provider. I was like, oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. There's like fitness programs and diet programs and mental health support and things that I just, it's insurance. So you're always like, oh, where's the claim? Do I have to, do I have to be pre-qualified? And you're kind of in and out of the portal. But I spent some time in the portal, took my own advice recently, and there's just so much great stuff out there. So,
yeah.
And
Absolutely.
we know that, usage of this is, HR people are always saying, but people aren't using it. So it's a good reminder both for HR people to sell it internally and employees to go look and see what they have.
Yeah, I think that is a great reminder. And I think too, as you go into if you take a moment to evaluate kind of your caregiving role and all that you're doing at work and at home, and you're finding that your hours in your day are exceeding the 24 hours that we actually have, closer to that 25 hours a week that you mentioned earlier, I think it can be helpful also to sit down and kind of evaluate, are there things that I'm doing in a caregiving capacity that maybe I could find resources to outsource? Or can I reach out to others in my kind of circle of care to get more support so that I can hopefully maintain this balance? Because what we often see is burnout and caregivers who are working. I don't have data on this, but I would imagine that they burn out maybe a little faster than your average caregiver just because they're trying to balance it all and to, keep all ships, afloat and moving forward. And so I think taking time to evaluate, okay, what am I doing? Is there anyone in my family who can help support me? Or do I need to look into something like home care, kind of like the care we offer at home instead? Or do I need to look into an adult day program so that my loved one can go there during the day so that I can continue working? So I think starting to look into those resources and uncovering what's available can really be helpful in at least maintaining, maybe you're not gaining many hours back in your day, but just help you maintain all of the balls that you're juggling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I love everything you've said. And what I would add is, because so much of caregiving is so personal, right? So intimate. And I know with me, when my parents, because it was, 2 terminal diagnoses, so you become so focused on this is literally life or death, and I have to be there. I have to be the one. Well, there are things that we do, that add up to that 25.5 hours on a daily basis that aren't personal and that really don't require, the personal touch or excellence, where good enough is really good enough. And so I've been talking to employers about, one of the most meaningful things my employer gave me when I was going through one of my caregiving experience was Grubhub gift cards and TaskRabbit gift cards, because, and this was, my third caregiving stint, which was my spouse. I was at cancer treatment all day with my husband, and we would come home and we had, kids in high school who had soccer games, and we were, mentally and physically exhausted, but you still have to feed these children. And so, we did a lot of takeout, and that becomes expensive. And my company enabled that through these, investments into my Grubhub account. Like, hey, kids, life is terrible. Dad has cancer. We're exhausted, but chocolate cake for dessert tonight. I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but it really helped. And, things break around the house, right? And my husband, who had been the one who was fixing everything, was, going through cancer treatment. So a gift card to TaskRabbit meant that, when the faucet snapped off or something, it wasn't like, it wasn't the kind of thing that brings you to your knees, like that straw on the camel's back. So I tell employers and also caregivers, what are the things that we all do every single day? Think about those, and how can you offload that burden? Grocery shopping, everybody needs shampoo in the shower, right? So, supplies, house cleaning, those kinds of things that don't require that, personal touch.
Yeah, that's such great advice, Liz. And I think sometimes maybe for an employer, that seems maybe a little less daunting than starting a whole new benefit for the entire company. Just meeting that specific employee where they're at and providing a little more support. And I think back to your comment about loyalty and retaining employees, we know how expensive it is to hire new employees, to go out and recruit and hire. A lot of times it's easier to retain a really good employee. And if you know that employee is going through a season of caregiving, making those little investments in them can really go a long way in supporting their well-being, but also keeping them at work. Because as you mentioned, caregiving is expensive. And so, we need to be able to support caregivers so they can fund the care and support and fund their family and their needs. But also I hear from caregivers sometimes that work can be a little bit of a respite from their caregiving role too. So I'd be curious to know, Liz, if you hear that often and any thoughts on that comment.
Absolutely. I mean, and I absolutely felt it myself. I remember, my boss's first reaction when I told her what was happening with my family was take a leave. And one, we didn't have paid leave. So I was terrified that she was going to recommend that, which she did, because I couldn't afford it. But two, work was where I was in control. Like, I'd been doing my job for 20 something, 30 years. I forget how long, say 20 something. So like that was where everything was orderly and I knew what I was facing. Like that dementia and those cancer, diagnoses, that was all new and completely out of my control. Work was like, I've got this. I've been doing this and I'm good at my job. And so in the working daughter community, we have a phrase, TGIM. Thank God it's Monday. Because it's time to go back to where everything is orderly and in control.
That is too funny. TGIM. I like that. I've not heard that one before. But you're so right. And I think so much of caregiving feels so out of our control. And so having a little bit of that control in the workplace can really be that time away that you need. So you can go back to your caregiving role and continue on.
Right.
So such a good point. Well, and I know that, in your community of working daughters, it's such a fantastic resource. So would love for you to share a little bit more about how people can get connected. But then if there are other resources out there for working caregivers that you would also recommend, would love for you to share that as well.
Sure. Well, again, for anyone who knows a caregiver, like I said, TaskRabbit and, DoorDash or whatever, gift cards and grocery, I think is really important. But yeah, Working Daughter, we have two missions. The first is that no one goes through caregiving alone, and the other is to make care and career compatible. So on the latter side, that's where we go into companies and encourage them to, put programs in place to support their caregivers. I'm just about to launch a course for HR managers on Udemy, the learning platform, all about how to support your caregiving employees. So I'm excited about that because it's really, really comprehensive. But for the community, where the action is our private Facebook group, and we have about 10,000 members, and that's a place to do just what I said, not feel alone, to have, 9,999 other women and men, there are men in there too, who talk about the things that you talk about, who are thinking about the things that you're talking about, that maybe when you go out with that other group of girlfriends or, coworkers, they're not there. So it's tough to talk about, toileting, your adult parent, or, just the frustration sometimes that we feel. One of the things that people always say when they come into our community is it's so nice to have a place to complain a little bit. Not that we're complaining the whole time, but I think society still looks at caregivers as these angels and, who are just like such blessings for all of us. And that's true. Caregivers are angels. And sometimes hearing that all the time can be really frustrating because in your mind, you're thinking, I can't take it anymore. And so one of the tenets that we hold true in the Working Daughter community is that we can hold two opposing truths at the same time, that we can be screaming, I can't do this another day, and also thinking, I never want to lose her or him, So it's a place to be real. It's a place to feel less alone, but also to say, like somebody was looking for the best digital picture frame for, to give their parent for Christmas, and somebody was looking for a rollator that went easily over a carpet, so that type of peer-to-peer sharing happens in there. And then for women, especially professional women who need more support. So they want a plan of attack. They want a sounding board. They want to talk about what's happening with their siblings. They maybe want to bring their parents into a conversation to convince them to bring, if there's an older parent caring for another older parent, to bring somebody in, into the home to help. Then I do one-on-one coaching with caregivers as well, and help them set up, get as organized as possible around the financial, the legal, the housing options, the care, living at home options. And so, I find for professional women, especially, who are like, I need support, I need a partner in this. And they have partners in so many, they have personal trainers and they have people helping them through, parenting. So it just makes sense they have someone helping them through this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's so interesting how we do kind of hire out support for a lot of things, like housekeepers, people to mow our lawn, people to help us through, parenting challenges. And we're starting to see more of that for people that are caring for aging parents. And so I think it's great to see those services because for many people, it is their first time caregiving and they've never done it before. And so having someone like you who's been through a lot of caregiving scenarios, walking alongside them can just be really helpful. So we will be sure to put the link to Working Daughters in our show notes so that people can connect with you and follow your work and connect with other working caregivers. Because as you mentioned, it is so empowering to know I'm not alone. There are other people who are going through this, and maybe they're not within your workplace or within your office building, but others out there across the country who are balancing, that 25 hours of work and of duties into that 24-hour period, and so that they can kind of understand what you're going through.
Yeah, and I think it's not just that they're not alone, but what they're feeling is normal.
Yes. Oh, that's huge. And I really do like that you called out that you can have those two opposing truths at the same time. I think that, caregivers talk about the range of emotions that they feel. And so knowing that you can be both frustrated and also have so much love for that person at the same time. I think that to hear that that's normal, I can imagine is also just very empowering and helps kind of put the caregiver at ease.
One of the things I always say to the members is judge your actions, not your thoughts. Because your thoughts are not always going to be pure around caregiving, right? But you're showing up, and that's what you should judge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Liz, you've shared so many great tips, resources. Is there anything else that you want caregivers to remember about this conversation of balancing caregiving while working?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to go back to the stigma that I know people are feeling, that I felt myself, and remind them that caregivers right now are the fastest growing employee segment in the workforce. So from that perspective, we're not alone. We're not the outliers, we're the future of work. And so I say that in hope that it encourages caregivers to speak up for what they need in the workplace, because employers need us just as much as we need them.
Such great advice to end on. Well, Liz, thank you so much for joining me. I always enjoy our conversations.
Me too.
And I love the work that you're doing. Thank you for supporting caregivers and for providing a safe space for them to feel connected and encouraged.
And thank you for the conversation. It's so important.
I want to thank Liz again for joining me today and for sharing her valuable insights on balancing work and caregiving. I hope our conversation has highlighted the challenges that many caregivers face and offered strategies to help you navigate them. Remember, you're not alone, and it's okay to ask for support, to set boundaries, and to prioritize your own well-being as a caregiver. Don't be afraid to have conversations with your employer about your caregiving responsibilities. They may be more understanding and accommodating than you might expect. By seeking support and utilizing resources, you can approach caregiving and your career with strength and confidence. If you have additional thoughts or stories on this topic of working while caregiving, please email me. My email address is caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's caregiver chats at homeinsteadinc.com. I also invite you to follow us on Facebook at Home Instead Inc. for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. You can find all of the links in today's show notes. Thanks for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com to learn more.